Hiya Mark, lovely to meet up with you at the range and do some work on your swing. Hopefully you got the email apologising for the delay in posting this review, and also forwarding the dates for your next session. I'll do that over the next day or so, and we can get something arranged for maybe week starting the 18th of March-ish. So we'll get that sorted over the next day or two for you. As promised, quick recap on the key points that we covered. First of all, at address, we talked about how the line of the shaft was sitting a little bit too upright at address. So if we draw that line through the shaft, ideally we would want it like we see here with Mike Bennett. We want to see a line on the shaft hitting the player around about the belt buckle line. So shaft pointing to the belt buckle, as opposed to shaft pointing more midway through the torso. So that's one change. We then looked at your setup from face on, and we explained that you were dropping the upper centre back too much. You push the hips forward, which is fine, but you've also let the upper centre translate back too much. This in turn causes the low point of the swing to be back, and also causes the attack on the golf club, or the golf ball should I say, to be excessively shallow, slightly upwards when we're hitting iron shots. So what we asked you to do was feel like the upper centre, the centre of the shoulder turn and the centre of the hips were actually over the top of one another. Now you can see there is a slight side bending to the right, and that's fine. We should see that in most setup positions. But what we're also seeing now is an upper centre that's much more towards the middle of the stance and much more over the top of the golf ball. This reduced side bend makes it easier to get the left shoulder to work down in the takeaway, and also helps hit down on the golf ball during the downswing, as opposed to hitting up on it excessively with a low point that's back. So setup changes, handle lower, and you can see here, sorry about the darkness, but it was towards the end of the session, the handle has dropped a little bit, but still not enough. So I'd like to see the handle even lower than we see there, but we are moving in the right direction. And as we see here, we've got the upper and lower centre much more aligned than we see at the start of the session. So start of the session, upper centre too far back, left shoulder working across, pushing us off the golf ball excessively. Midway through the session, upper centre and lower centre aligned, left shoulder moving down for longer, causing us to move off the golf ball much less during the backswing. So just some little chip shots you were hitting there, and that's fine, just to isolate the positions, but that's set up much better. So stack both centres over the top of one another, as we see on the lower right hand footage. And then what we talked about was what was happening during the takeaway, and with yourself we see the hands work up and the club roll back. You see how the club rolls behind you too much during the takeaway. Now we also discussed your grip and the angle of your club face, which is quite hooded, and the grip is quite strong in both hands, so both hands rotated to the right a little bit too much. But it didn't really relate to the shot that we were hitting. Towards the end of your session it did, but for now, at the start of the session, we're losing a lot of shots out to the right. So by weakening the grip, we're just going to emphasise that even more. So we left the grip alone to start with. What we want to see during the takeaway are the hands working up the lower line and the club staying much more on that line and square to it, as opposed to rolling beneath it like we see here. And the feeling that we gave you was that the back of the left hand was to have no rotation during the takeaway. You can see when you do that on this top centre footage that the club stays much more on plane, it stays much squarer to that plane. But when you were doing this, some of the shots were hooking quite a lot on you. That's the time to start to weaken that grip off, to take some left curve off it. But where we've stood here on the top left, no use weakening the grip, because we're just going to hit the ball much further to the right. As you can see, the arms very much above plane, club very much across the line by reducing the amount at which the left hand rotates during the backswing. The hands were on a much more on-playing position and the club is much less across the line. So trying to improve the initial move from setup P1, so when the shaft's parallel to the ground, in the takeaway P2, has in turn also improved the top of the backswing P4. Hit some really good shots towards the end of your session. The two keys to work on before we get together next are stacking up the two centres, as we see here, much more weight forward on top of the golf ball, and improving the type of takeaway we make. I'm just going to get rid of those lines, let you have a look at these together. So the ideal takeaway, as we see here, demonstrated by Mike Bennett on the bottom left, compared to where you were at the start of your session and then where you were at the end of your session. Remember what the key feeling is here. Zero rotation of the back of the left hand has a big effect on the pitch of the shoulders during the takeaway. The stability of the centre of the shoulder turn as well when viewed from face on, and also the subsequent position at the top of the backswing. Much better with the arms than what we see here. So some really good changes, and I can't wait to get stuck in when we get together next at the range. Well done.